Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. I'm Peter Beinart, a fellow at the Foundation. Today is February 26th, 2025, and I'm glad to be here with Dr. Eman Ansari and Dr. Shakow. Dr. Ansari is a pediatric pulmonologist and critical care medicine physician and assistant of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School and a Palestinian American. Dr. Shakow is a lecturer in Harvard Medical School's Department of Global Health and Social Medicine and a Jewish American. And I wanted to talk to them because they've been involved in really, really important work on university campuses in fighting back against the growing climate of repression of speech and scholarship about Palestinians and about Israel-Palestine. And so I'm really, really grateful to have you both here, Eman and Aaron.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
So Eman, Dr. Ansari, let me start with you. Can you just talk about what you feel like the climate is today on university campuses for people who want to speak out for Palestinian freedom, or people who want to do research or create events that are aimed at shining a light on conditions for Palestinians?
That's an excellent question, and I think that's something that keeps me up at night most of the nights, especially over the past year and a half. So the climate has not been hospitable in general. I moved to the US 28 years ago, almost 28 years ago, to pursue my residency in pediatrics and then training in pulmonary and critical care. And I did not feel that stating that I'm a Palestinian or speaking about Palestine was something that people were comfortable with, as if like the word Palestine by itself is a political statement rather than my identity, who I am. But it definitely took a turn to much worse place over the past year and a half. But I'll start by telling you how I came to know Aaron. So just before October of 2023, I met a friend who became a friend of mine, a physician at the BI Deaconess Medical Center, who's an intensive care unit physician. And both of us were interested in going on a medical mission to the West Bank, teaching ultrasound. And that medical mission got canceled basically because by October, it was supposed to be in November, and by October, all such missions were hard to do. But then we decided that he's Israeli, I'm Palestinian, and there is a missing space. And that missing space is not in academia only, that missing space even in the society of Palestinians and Israelis and pro-Palestinians and Jews who are working together. And most of what we saw in the media was how this group is against that group, but there isn't that space where both groups are for the humanity of both peoples. So we decided that we would like to create this space, promote this space in academia. And with that, Akiva introduced me to Aaron, and he said, Aaron would be a great ally. And since then, Aaron and I became friends. And we worked together, me, Akiva, Aaron, and a group of great students and great faculty at Harvard. And did our first event, which was in January of last year. One of the concerns and one of the manifestations, I would say, of some of the repression, anti-Palestinian racism, and silencing is that such an event didn't get any publicity. So it was supremely attended. People were on a wait list, and the event was outstanding. However, it didn't make it to my local newspaper, the Boston Journal, Boston Globe, the New York Times, or any of the national newspapers. And I feel that that was partly intentional, because when bad things happen and when events are canceled, that gets publicized, which is good to show anti-Palestinian racism and try to fix it. But then when it's fixed, or when good things happen, they don't get publicized. So the message to the world would be, you can't talk about Palestine because even at Harvard, even at Columbia, even at Yale, these events are canceled and there's no follow-up.
Mm.
Um, so I'll turn it to Aaron. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now what we're seeing are a few kind of intersecting problems. One of them is racism and censorship to a degree that I think is really extraordinary as, a kind of broader movement against, free expression on campuses, asserts itself, and it has used what is widely called the Palestine exception, not only to repress speech and action about Palestinians by students who are learning how to be politically active, after all, but also all kinds of political expression and all kinds of political action and all kinds of scholarly action. I mean, Eman mentioned the kind of freeze out of this really remarkable conference last January on the state of health in Gaza, which was the first such conference at Harvard. We have tried to get published in medical journals. We were rejected, for our submissions about, public health in Gaza and other aspects of the current situation within days, without any kind of peer review, without any kind of normal process. And, this is widely experienced by scholars of public health. So one of the things that's happening is repression and censorship. Another thing that's happening, and I think this is interesting and really cause for self-reflection by me as an academic, is an avoidance of pain, which in the medical school context, of course, is a bit horrifying that administrators feel like this just awful, awful suffering that's being experienced not only by the people in Gaza, but also by Palestinians in the diaspora, is too much for them somehow. When Eman, has spoken with some administrators who have not been willing to or able to meet with students, they said that they wanted some mediation before they would meet with the students. And I think that this mediation is partly just about this aversion to pain. And I must plead guilty. When I first started, I'm now at the medical school and I do medical history. But when I first started and came to Harvard as a graduate student, I was studying the history of Palestine. And, I sat for a few years trying to do this work. And it was just like nobody was listening. And so I said, okay, well, let's do something else and let's get at structural violence, from a perspective that people will listen to. But this is a kind of soft censorship. And I think that many academics, and, I feel great remorse for this in the present time because, I think that more speech and, the solution to censorship is more speech and more action and more insistence on telling these stories. But I think that we're all doing it at one level or another, even, in small ways, like, I just don't have the energy, to fight through all of this, kind of propaganda. I don't have the energy to write on this topic. And I think that some of what we're seeing on campuses right now, that leads to a silencing of, Palestinian voices and Palestinian perspectives and Palestinian experience is, a feature of this response that unfortunately has not been checked and that is integrated with, the harder censorship and the harder repression that we've seen over the last year.
Um, Eman, when you talk to other faculty or administrators about the desire to focus on public health in Gaza, focus on public health among Palestinians as something which is, for people who are concerned about global public health would be a natural thing to focus on given the scale of the catastrophe that's happened there. What kind of responses do you get?
So I'm a physician. Most of my circle, my colleagues, my friends are physicians. And some of them, that discomfort that Aaron is talking about is manifesting by them saying, I just want to focus on medicine. I don't want to deal
Right,
with
right,
politics. But it is medicine. When
right,
over a
right,
thousand,
right.
when over 1,000 healthcare worker is killed,
Yes.
those are our colleagues.
Right.
Those are people from our profession, and it's so hard. So I will tell you, um, and it's not that I'm changing the subject,
Yeah.
but over the past week,
Mm,
just looking at the photos of the Bibas brothers,
mm,
I would cry every
mm.
single night. I couldn't sleep for several nights because they look like my kids.
Right. Right.
They
Right.
look exactly like my kids with the red head, with everything. And how
Mm,
horrific is the suffering of that family, the suffering of those kids who were killed. So that empathy
mm.
that we should share as humans without the labels, without who's Jewish, who's Palestinian, who's Israeli, who's that empathy and the failure of empathy with people who are so distant
Yeah.
is, I think, one of the most disheartening experiences I've had over the past year and a half. It is medicine. These are
Mm,
physicians. The killing of people is medicine. The infectious diseases that are rampant is medicine. Starvation as a weapon of war is global health, is medicine. Yet people are, I would say, maybe afraid is the word,
mm.
because I don't think at one-to-one level they are necessarily ideologically pro harming anyone. But I think it's a topic that became like a pariah topic
Yes.
culturally,
Yes.
and no one wants to touch it. And I think
Right.
it's bigger than campuses. Like as Aaron said, Aaron, you're talking about days. One of my colleagues said within hours, when he sent a manuscript to one of the American medical journals, within an hour and a half, it got rejected. Not a single American medical journal is publishing anything about Gaza.
Why is it? I'm curious. Just like what I see that the Lancet in Britain has been.
Britain.
Why is it that they are able to do it when the prestigious American medical journals won't?
I think there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. The president of my university lost her job
Yes. Yeah.
over over this particular political issue. So people worry. Like there is a lot of self-censorship. I wouldn't call it like a plot, a bigger plot, but there is
Right. Yeah.
self-censorship that creates a culture, and the culture become very fearful from
Yeah.
speaking about Palestinians. But the flip side of that is like we teach humanities, we teach healing, we teach
Yes.
caring, and we talk about the oppressed. Yet at the time of the application, that's what my students come to me and ask me, like, we talk a good talk about
Right.
helping the oppressed, yet when things are happening,
Yes.
we're not speaking up. We speak up historically.
Yes.
That's actually something that also my daughter said in her graduation speech last year. Like, we're so good at
Yeah.
talking about the past and
Right.
litigating the past, but
Yes.
we're not good about talking about the present and how we can fix it. And
Yeah.
unless we are able to create a space where people can come together and discuss and debate with an open mind, we
Yeah.
would not be able to fix it if we keep these silos of this group doesn't feel safe in the presence of the other group and the other group doesn't feel safe in the presence of this group. How are we going to move forward?
Yes. Aaron, can I just ask you? I mean,
Yeah.
in many institutions, including I imagine the ones that you're part of, there are people who just keep their heads down because they don't want to get in trouble. There are other people who actively go out of their way in order to shut down certain kinds of conversations, right? And not always, but oftentimes you and I both know that those are people from the Jewish community, right? I imagine they might include some of your colleagues, even at Harvard Medical School, or certainly people in the larger Boston Jewish community who kind of they see the way that they protect Jews, right, as by trying to shut down what they consider to be these slanderous or even anti-Semitic kind of, discourses. And I'm curious what your interaction has been like with folks who take that perspective and how you try to make the case to them actually that this kind of speech is important and necessary.
Yes, I mean, I have had a number of such interactions.
Mhm.
Sometimes I will get an email from a Jewish person after I've written something, and it will be, STFU, you self-hating person.
Mm.
I'm expurgating a little bit.
Sure.
And sometimes they will be very long and thoughtful
Right.
and and willing to engage. And with the people who engage with me, I've found a real disconnect between me and them. And what the way that I understand it is a kind of transition between a sense of feeling pain and a lack of recognition of power. And so I think that this syllogism that, I feel pain because of my membership in a group excludes the possibility that in fact I'm powerful and in fact I'm causing harm to others, makes those kinds of conversations that would explore that transition that, the Jewish community has undergone between, let's say, 1903 and the present, impossible. And I start with
1903, the date of the famous Kishinev pogrom, for people who think that you just chose it from random. Yeah.
random. Yeah. It was also the date that, an ancestor of mine wrote a very widely read, anti-Zionist essay,
Uh-huh.
as it happens, in
Mm.
which, he was talking about the way in which the Zionist movement had worked actively to suppress, other members of the Jewish community from, offering their opinions. And I think that there has been a very long-standing disconnect that's promoted by this kind of thinking, that it's important to conquer the other perspectives rather than engaging in, a very important, morally, politically, socially important conversation about how we are as a group and how we are as a community, and, how we're behaving in the public sphere. And I think that the people that, that I have been able to engage with within my community of peers, at the university, I think that it has been very, very difficult to bridge the divide that is, kind of established by this framework of needing to conquer all other perspectives. And we're still trying to overcome that. And before we do that, we will not be able to see and engage with the pain that's being caused right now, that Eman and other Palestinians are experiencing, and create spaces that we need in the university to think about how we need to react as an academic community. Right now, we're just paralyzed by the inability to engage with that pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
May I suggest
Yeah,
something
please,
as well?
please, Eman.
Like, I think out of empathy, because I really feel like empathy is what defines us as humans. And if we lose empathy, we truly lose our humanity. Um, I think there's a lot of pain on the Jewish side today.
Mm.
It's not only pain on my Palestinian side. Part of it, of course, October 7th was a painful moment and was very scary for a lot of people
Yes.
after the Holocaust, after what happened in Europe, to
Yes.
finally find a shelter. For a lot of
Yes.
people who did not know the entire story, it's a
Yes.
shelter. And they
Yes.
finally felt safe.
Yes.
76 years, they felt
Yes.
safe. And all of a sudden, that is shattered.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it is scary. It is a foundation that is broken under them. And then there are people who are scared from what they're seeing on TV,
Yes.
for what they're seeing is happening in their name, and they'd rather avoid that discussion.
Mm.
Um, and when they say they feel unsafe, I take them at their word.
Mm.
They feel unsafe. Like in my mind, there's a difference between safety and comfort, but they
Yes.
feel unsafe because they associate
Yes.
the discussion with the Holocaust again, with
Yes.
October 7th again.
Yes.
And that is
Yes.
the source of unsafety, not the
Yes.
fact that they're hearing a discussion on Zoom that's making them unsafe. So
Yes.
I feel that perhaps if we take the approach of empathy and acknowledgement of their fear, perhaps
Yes.
that would be a beginning to have that conversation with them. And I say
Yes.
that because one of my dear friends and colleagues is an amazing, amazing person who does so much for people in need, so much in service of people who are marginalized, hurt. And when I asked that person, so what do you think about what's happening in Palestine? And this predated October 7th.
Yeah.
The response was, Iman, I try not to think about it
Mm,
because if I examine it and I think
mm,
about it, there's a good chance I will need to uproot myself and my
mm,
family
mm,
from
mm,
my
mm.
community. It's
Yes.
like
Yes.
their foundational narratives will be completely shaken and they will
Yes.
need to redefine themselves. And that is scary. That is scary for a lot of people.
Yes. Yes. But I'm curious whether, I mean, you must be having patients or colleagues who probably may not know Palestinians or may have all kinds of ideas about Palestinians that may be racist and dehumanizing. And I'm curious if you ever do feel that those interactions that you have with those people, what you notice about how they react when they learn that you are Palestinian. Do they say, "Oh, well, you must be the exception," or does it
Yeah.
sometimes lead to them rethinking some of these stereotypes that they might have?
If people would give me $1 for every time they tell me, Iman, you are different, you are special, you are the exception, I would be a millionaire right now
And
because
what do you say when people say that?
I tell them no, absolutely incorrect. They just didn't give other people a chance. I feel that a lot of people get surprised when I say, like, with the prior election of President Trump, I started openly speaking about being a Muslim because there was a lot of negativity about who are the Muslims. And people were surprised, like, really, you're a Muslim, you're not wearing hijab, but you're so smart. And, I thought, what does that mean? There are so many smart people, especially in medicine. Like medicine, like it owes a lot of its foundation to the Muslim era and the Muslim civilization. So there is a lot of that. You are the exception. And perhaps one of the things that I feel resonates with people is that I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. I never experienced a siege like the siege in Gaza. I never experienced bombing. I never experienced oppression. And whenever I approach any person, I approach them as an equal without feeling that they've harmed me or they're my overlords or anything like that. And I think that type of a relationship engenders different responses. But as a result, I would say remove the siege of Gaza, stop the oppression, treat people as well as I was treated growing up, and as well as I was treated as a physician here in Boston for the past 28 years. And you will get that exceptional person who will not be exceptional, will be everyone around you. But yes, I'm one of my people and I'm not any different. And there are people who are way nicer, way smarter, way better than me within the
Yeah.
Palestinian community.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but I wanted to just follow up on one more thing before I go to Aaron. You made a really interesting point about the difference in your experience. Even though you were Palestinian, you were not under Israeli control, you were in Saudi Arabia. What do you say to someone whose family is in Gaza, right? Or his family even in the West Bank and undergoing terrible, terrible things, who says, listen, I don't feel like I can have that empathy for Israeli Jews. Given what Israel is doing and given the fact that it has such wide support in Israel, I don't want to sit down with Zionist Jewish students and say, "Let me tell you about my pain, and you tell me about your pain." That I'm not that this I don't this is not something that I feel capable or comfortable of doing, given the trauma that's being inflicted upon me and the way in which it's denied by people on the other side.
So I would say, as a human and as a
Yeah,
physician, I would understand that. Like,
yeah,
I would understand someone who's so pained, so traumatized, not having the space to, like, they're still mourning.
yeah.
They're still dealing with a lot of emotions. But I am so surprised and so shocked by how many of them who are willing who are
Mm,
willing to show empathy, who are willing to show humanity, who are willing to find a place in their heart because they've suffered
mm,
to understand the suffering. And you see that with a lot of the videos on Instagram, on TikTok, on what people write, on the gratitude whenever we acknowledge their humanity, on the gratitude to the Israelis who are at the border in Gaza, doing things to bring in aid to the Palestinians. Those Palestinians inside Gaza are grateful for the Israelis outside Gaza trying to help them. So humans are, in my opinion, instinctively are good people. And I think there is a lot of space to heal on both sides. But I was shocked to find so many Palestinians who are open to the Israeli side and to healing.
Erin, I wanted to ask you about what you notice amongst students. Do you find that this self-censorship is already now kind of pervasive among other students worried about not getting jobs? You know, if they're involved in this subject, or do you find mostly that the students are actually there are many that students are angry at the institutions because they feel like the institutions are not allowing this conversation? What do you notice among students?
My sense of students is skewed a little bit because people have, I think, gravitated toward faculty members who are willing to listen and engage about these topics. And, you know, as we were discussing earlier, I think that's fewer than I would like. That said, it is hard to be a student in this particular moment. It's very, very hard to be a student. I think that students are managing a large number of things. And, you know, I was at a community meeting not long ago in which a colleague and friend of mine reached out to members of the MIT and Harvard communities saying, what can we do to support students? And several students came. And there was just an outpouring, and a lot of it was just that they were lonely, you know, that they needed, you know, these were student activists, of course, but just the things that they felt deprived of at this moment included things that I think students in 2025 are deprived of in general. And coming out of the pandemic, I think everybody is to some degree very much in pain. And when you're a Palestinian student or an Arab student or a Muslim student or a Jewish student, you know, the difficulty of navigating this particular moment in the political economy of the United States is just compounded by the sense of pain related to your identity or pain related to your family or your own personal security. And this is compounded, of course, by, you know, threats to people's student status by the US government and, you know, other reactionary forces in the Jewish community that have been collaborating with them. So I think that students are overwhelmed. I think that that's the clear sense that I have is that students are overwhelmed, and many of them who are politically active are continuing this political activism, but they don't know what's permitted. And the university has, you know, I think been trying to navigate walk a very difficult tightrope. But one of the things that's happened is that they have diverged from their usual order. And they're kind of making up law as they go along. And as a result, people don't really know what kind of speech and what kind of action is permitted. And so in combination with this, overarching sense of overwhelm, students are feeling very, very constrained in ways that I think are not good for their education. You know, being political is a basic part of being a student. Having spaces where they can explore these aspects of being a human being are critical. And right now, the university is not creating those spaces. And I think Eman and I are in agreement, and we talked about this, we've talked about this continuously, that it's critical, not just in terms of, being able to raise Palestinian voices and, fight against the oppression of Palestine and Palestinians, but also just as teachers and educators, it's important for us to, figure out how to create these spaces and to collaborate with, administrators to make those spaces come into being. That's critical, both from the Jewish community side and, every other side. That's just what we need to do as teachers.
Yeah.
I would add
Yeah,
something
please,
to
Eman, please.
So we all have kids, the three of us, and if we know anything about young people, is that their risk assessment is not very well developed.
Mm,
So I think the students. In terms of self-censorship, I don't think it's self-censorship as much as their parents worried about them and telling them, please don't
right.
get involved, don't be political. But if we saw anything in the encampments last summer, is that they did not care about the risk. They did not care about their, putting their education at a stake, and they went out and did the encampment. Now, it was a missed opportunity for us as faculty and as university administrators. Had we created the spaces for them to speak up, for
Mhm.
them to discuss and debate their ideas, to have this academic freedom and academic debate of thoughts and ideas, I don't think encampments would have happened.
Mm,
But like anything, you suppress
right,
speech. It doesn't mean that it will not happen. It will
right.
happen in a way that you are completely not involved with or in control of. I mentioned to you, I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and the expectations from women are very different than in Europe and the US. Perhaps here we're like 50 or 100 years ahead. So it's Elizabeth Bennet's era.
Mm,
I was growing up, and reading was
mm,
out of the question. For my mom, if I read a book, that's like the worst thing ever, unless it is a school book,
mm.
because books can put bad ideas in your head. So what's the result? I'm a voracious reader. I read
Uh-huh.
and read and read and read. And similarly, if we stop students from speaking about it in spaces that are permitted by the administration, they will find other spaces, encampments and otherwise. So I hope we all, as faculty and administrators throughout the country, see that as a lesson and a missed opportunity rather than double down on silencing and suppression. But I'll give you an example where I felt uncomfortable and I felt partly unsafe. And maybe you and I have discussed this before, Peter. But last May, there was an event in my hometown in Massachusetts, in which they were discussing photography reflecting on the Nakba. That event was scheduled a year before, so before October 7th. And that library went ahead and had the event. And I was invited as a local who's a Palestinian American to reflect on some of the images. And that event was completely destroyed by protest and opposition. And it was physical. Like they were there, they were screaming, they were yelling terrorists and other stuff at us. And one of the people sitting in front of me was a father in my son's school. And he was looking me in the eye and saying terrorist. And then he was asking me, how about the Jewish Nakba from the Arab world? So, of course, that evening I went back home completely shaken. But the following day, I woke up and I decided to read about what happened to the Jews who were in the Arab world.
Mm,
Had I not been challenged, I wouldn't
right.
have read about
Mm,
that part of the history. I was so focused on reading about Palestine and
right.
how did Israel come to being that I've never read about the Jews of North Africa, of Iraq, of anywhere else. And that challenge was an important moment of growth for me.
Mm,
Why
mm,
are we denying
mm,
ourselves and our students these moments of growth?
right.
So I think this is crucial. Like we really need to change course because otherwise we're moving 50 and 100 years back to Elizabeth
Right.
Bennet's era.
Yes, 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 yes. Uh, Aaron, we're just, oh, did you want to say something, Aaron?
I just want to add one quick
Yeah,
thing to
yeah,
that. I mean, you mentioned the Kishinev massacre of 1903, and it's, something that became very important for Jews and kind of
right.
understanding,
Yes,
the forces arrayed against them.
yes,
And there was a very interesting book that came out a few years ago talking about the relationship between tabloid journalism
right,
and this kind of consciousness of oppression.
right. This is
And
like
I
Steve Dipperstein at Stanford, right?
Dipperstein at
Yeah,
Stanford,
yeah,
yeah. So I mean, I think that what we have seen over the last 15 or 20 years in the Jewish community is a kind of tabloidization of our experience, in which, the terms of reference are increasingly simplified and increasingly, they scream, headlines. They don't involve the kind of, thoughtful exploration that Eman somehow managed to excavate from, someone hollering at her. And I fear that what we're seeing on campuses now and the kind of repression of, people engaged in activism in this, area against this genocide in Palestine have experienced is that this tabloidization of experience is creating, is kind of feeding itself. And so all experiences, rather than being what you would hope for in a university setting, are being tabloidized. And the law is being tabloidized, and the university regulations are being tabloidized. And, it's increasingly hard to create the spaces that we're looking for where you can actually engage with people and engage with other people's pain and think about a way forward. So I did want to say that I see an arc there that we're really still confronting right now.
Yes. Well, I think that's a very important point on which to end, right? Especially we have a president who, Donald Trump, who kind of, is kind of the political embodiment of the New York Post in a certain way and has now taken that to other mediums, but it's exactly that kind of level of discourse. But you, the two of you model a completely different kind of discourse, Aaron and Eman, that I think is really inspiring will be inspiring for a lot of people who are struggling in their own institutions to try to have those institutions live out their best traditions and not succumb and not sacrifice their principles. So I'm really, really grateful to both of you for joining me.
Can I end on a very positive note?
Yes.
So you probably have heard about an event that was supposed to take place at the Harvard Medical School on January 21st. There was a lot of publicity that it was canceled, but no publicity that it was reinstated. So I would be celebrating this podcast as a path to basically amplify this triumph that the event was reinstated and the patients from Gaza came on February 13th. And the event was supremely attended, excellent. No one felt unsafe. The patients felt loved and felt joy and felt that us, the Boston community, the Harvard Medical School community, acknowledged their humanity and had empathy for them. And this Monday, Dr. Barry Levy, which is the second part of the event, also happened. And events are happening. Today, the Center for Middle Eastern Studies is hosting an event by the poet Musab Abu Toha. Every week, there are one or two events that are happening that don't get publicized. And I would love to publicize them here to encourage more and more people in so many universities around the world to speak for the humanity, not only of Palestinians, but every marginalized, oppressed group of people. This is our moral debt to them, our moral duty to them. And I hope we do it right.
Absolutely. Well, that is a really uplifting note to end on. I think really important. So I want to thank all our listeners for joining us today and invite you to check out our website, fmep.org, for links to Palestine Legal's work and other resources we discussed today, plus many more resources related to Palestine, Israel. Please make sure you're subscribed to the Occupy Thoughts podcast. We are on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Spotify, so you won't miss any of the great content we post nearly every week. You can find a video of this and our other podcasts on YouTube and on our website, fmep.org. And with that, we will end. I'm Peter Beinart signing off until the next episode of Occupied Thoughts.
Yeah.